Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. The Ayatollah regime in Tehran is facing a painful choice: give up some of its most precious assets, indeed the very core of its agenda, or risk total collapse. Either it will agree to President Trump's demands in order to survive, but then become vulnerable to pressures both internal and external, or it will have to face a persistent military campaign. Regardless of the path it chooses, change seems inevitable, gradually, or in one fell swoop. This is how the situation appears from outside Iran, but could we possibly be wrong and the Ayatollahs actually find a way around this looming crisis? To unpack this scenario, we're joined by Dr. Eran Lerman, formerly a Deputy National Security Advisor here in Israel, currently the Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. It's great to have you with us, sir.
Always a pleasure.
Also joining us is a retired Brigadier General, Mark Kimmett, formerly Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs in the United States, as well as the Senior Officer at the U.S. Central Command. It's great to have you with us, General.
Yeah, good morning, Jonathan.
And last but certainly not least, our TV7 Editor-at-Large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, the complexities are vast, the challenges are growing, and tensions seem to simmer, and yet we have no final decision as to what course of action are we going towards.
So the crisis is almost 2 months old. It started on December the 28th. And while we here in the Middle East, especially in Jerusalem, are impatient, there have been crises such as with Iraq in 1990, 91, and then again in 2002, 2003, where the lead up to the war has taken some time, weeks, months. And if you look at it historically, it may not be too soon, because the decision to be taken is very grave. Now, obviously, President Trump has both the will and the capability to do what he decides to do. Obviously, too, he doesn't want to have a split screen where he is making a speech, especially a very solemn one, and the other half of the screen is taken by explosions in Tehran or wherever. But eventually, he will have to make a decision. Can he sell a withdrawal back from the region, saying, for instance, this has been an exercise in a surge? This should be a signal to China that should it try to threaten Taiwan, we can move forces very rapidly and accumulate them at the front, or some other such pretext. It doesn't seem like that. So the decision is really Khameini's. If he decides on a true compromise, President Trump will not go to war just in order to prove that when he threatens, he follows through.
It does seem genuine that President Trump is seeing the strong power option as a last resort, bringing us, General Kimmett, into the so-called Weinberger doctrine, which led also many administrations to consider whether or not to employ strong power. Just for the sake of our viewers, those are 6 points that were made at the time, rather delivered by the Secretary of Defense Weinberger during a national press club back in November 28th of 1984. And during that time, the 6-point basically highlighted whether or not the vital national security interests of the United States are upheld within the decision-making. The wholehearted commitment and intention to win the war, whether or not it's possible to win the war, clearly defined objectives, continual reassessment and adjustments to the objectives put forward, reasonable assurance of support of the American people, and of course, as mentioned in my response to Mr. Amir Oren, ensuring that this is indeed a last resort. General Kimmett, your thoughts?
Well, I don't know where in the rare books section of the library you found that document, but it hasn't been followed since 9/11. If you take a look at what we've done in Iraq, Afghanistan, what we've done in Midnight Hammer, Venezuela, any number of military operations, none have been that meticulous and well thought out in terms of abiding by those principles since then. So, and going back to Amir's comments as well, I think that we may be overthinking what's happening here. It is really, to my mind, Occam's razor, the most logical and first easiest to understand answer may be the proper one.
An interesting point indeed. Dr. Lerman, your take on that?
Well, the Weinberger Doctrine at the time was basically the distillation of the lessons of Vietnam. And it was brought into focus when Bush, the father, Bush 41, as we say, defined very narrow, very specific goals for the massive operation against Saddam Hussein to liberate Kuwait in 1991. That was basically a Weinberger template. Massive use of force to a very well-defined purpose, backed by international and domestic opinion, and with a clear end game structured in. I completely concur with General Kimmett's comment that much of this has been thrown overboard after 9/11, when, well, let's say, more powerful ideological and even emotional imperatives took over. But now it is still relevant in a sense, because for the Trump administration, the question is, what can we achieve by military force vis-a-vis Iran? And there are essentially, I would say, two effects possible. One may involve a prolonged and uncertain kind of conflict. And I sense that the American military establishment is not keen to commit to it. And that is the definition of regime change, of the overthrow of the regime, as a military goal, not as something that the military action may trigger internally in Iran, but as something that the military action is actually designed to achieve. And I think that's not where they are going. The other option is to basically finish those aspects of degrading Iran's strategic capabilities that were left not entirely finished or done in Midnight Hammer and during the Israeli operations under the title of Rising Lion or the 12 Days War. There's still a ballistic missile threat that needs to be dealt with. There are still remnants of the nuclear project that need to be dealt with. And possibly we may see also a decapitation blow against command structures, maybe going all the way up to the supreme leader under certain circumstances. But these are very narrowly defined, achievable actions. And Iran would be, all their blather and bravado aside, Iran would be very seriously constrained to respond in any effective way. They may try to launch against Israel. The consequences of that would involve actually the full use of the Israeli Air Force in an airspace that has already proven to be wide open for the IAF. So we may be looking at a much narrower range of action. And
Thank you, Dr.
it's
Lerman. I'd like to ask
one last
actually
option that
immediately General Kimmett, when we're talking about, or we hear what Dr. Lerman just mentioned, and take this into context as to the situation currently on the ground, putting out there, of course, I'm at least not familiar with any Title 50 operations taking place. I assume we're not privy to that type of intelligence, anyone in this current discussion. But nonetheless, we should ask whether or not with the absence of troops on the ground, can the United States and potentially with the support of Israel set the conditions for regime change?
Well, first of all, let me put a period at the end of the sentence on the first Gulf War that was laid out so well. The real adherence to the Weinberger Doctrine was at the end of the 100-hour war, when there are those clamoring for continuing the operation up to Baghdad. And there was a very deliberate decision and an argument and a very deliberate decision made by the president at that time that we had a definable goal, a constrained mandate, and we weren't going to violate that to basically try to leverage and profit from how easy it was to destroy the Iraqi army that was in Kuwait. The second point, I think it's important to understand that as we talk about the operational aspects of an attack on Iran, going against their missiles, going against leadership targets with Title 50, so on and so forth, it may be worthwhile to kind of take it up one level. And even President Trump understands that. He mentioned over the weekend, apparently, it was reported that he said, I don't understand why with all this massive buildup, they're not changing their mind. And he instinctively understood what warfare was for in this case, which was to change the behavior of the regime. And nothing thus far has changed the behavior of the regime. In fact, many would say that the regime is winning right now, because if the reports that are coming out are true, we, the Americans, have already made concessions on proxies. We've made concessions on the ballistic missile program. And now the argument is all about the level of enrichment that we are going to allow the Iranians to have. This sounds like they have talked us, the negotiators on the Iranian side, have talked us back into the 2015 agreement. So I don't understand where we are right now if the reports are correct. If that's the case, two things will happen. Number one, if there's a signature by the president on a much lower scale agreement, the Iranians will be the regime will be dancing in the street. And number two, there's no way that the other condition that the Iranians are seeking, which is to turn this into a treaty so that it doesn't change every 4 years, that'll never get 60 votes in the United States Senate. So all of these issues in many ways lead me to the belief that there will be a military attack. It will be harder and longer than we might have thought. And there's a very good chance at the end of that, Arakchi is right. We will not bend because we're Iranians. So unfortunately, whether it's at the negotiating table or on the battlefield, we may be conducting a fool's errand. I'm being quite pessimistic, but something to consider.
Well, I'm less pessimistic than you are. I think that much of the reporting currently taking place has to do with deceptive measures, which is well within the context defined by previous instances when strong power was utilized in order to obscure potential activities. But nonetheless, there is a lot that we do not know, and we only know what we do know. So we'll have to keep within the defined lines of what we do know. And in that context, Mr. Oren, there are little to no examples in history in which aerial power brought about regime change.
2 points. There were reports across the elite U.S. media, New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, it did not seem coincidental that out of the discussions that President Trump had with his advisors, especially the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Kane, sounded more cautious. I think this is mostly the work of headline writers who are aching to write the Kane Mutiny, the old Herman Wouk novel. So the headline drives the content in such cases. Now, you say that in history, aerial power almost always failed to get regime change. And we have, of course, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which is a very special type of aerial power. However, there is another lesson there that hopefully is being considered in Washington right now. And this is the Hirohito example. Emperor Hirohito was militaristic. He pushed the Tojo government to attack the United States. And the question at the end of the war was whether to designate him a war criminal, depose and hang him, or let him call on the Japanese people and military to give up. And the example of 1945 may be applicable to today, because without Khamenei, much like Khomeini at the time decided that enough was enough in the Iraq war after 8 years, without him, who is going to say, okay, we are now surrendering, we are giving up? There will be chaos. Someone might launch missiles, even though some central authority in Tehran would not. So it's a point to ponder.
The chaos that will be there will be due to foreign actors, particularly neighbors, that will seize the opportunity to try and infiltrate whatever vacuum exists there, to alter their borderlands to their own advantage and national security interests. And that will undoubtedly cause chaos, irrespective of what the outcome and how successful the attack will be. This is historically
General Kimmich
understood.
does not agree with you.
He doesn't need to agree with me. That is historically the way I have read it time and again. And when we're looking broadly into the various complexities at hand, Japan was quite secular, as opposed to the Ayatollah regime that is an ardent follower of 12er Shia Islam.
No, Hirohito was the deity.
Well,
They
again,
worshipped him.
going down into 12er Shia Islam, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is merely the interlocutor to the Al-Mahdi, which is the 12er Imam. And when we're looking at that context, this will only inflame further the situation unless you remove this block and degrade them fundamentally. Significant change will not take place unless you devastate their spirit, and that is something that can be done. But Dr. Lerman, I'd like to hear your take on that.
Well, there is, at least theoretically, a middle way, but it does require strategic patience. Namely, to follow the example already established in the context of Venezuela, not the Maduro raid, but what preceded it over a month, namely, essentially a naval blockade of Iran's ports, an end to Iranian oil exports, the final push of an already crumbling economy into the abyss, with the expectation that this would feed effectively the kind of dynamics that we already saw in the streets. Because the difference between previous outbursts of protest in Iran and this one is that this comes really from immense and immeasurable economic frustration, the impoverishment of what could have been a proud and prosperous country.
Yes, but Dr. Lerman, when we're talking about
this
Iranian
could be
oil
a tool
exports,
of
we're talking
policy
about
without
80% of the oil exports coming out of the Islamic Republic of Iran, constituting roughly 14% of the intake of China. So by establishing a blockade immediately without regulating, something like this would undoubtedly trigger some type of ripple effect on the
I
Southeast
don't think the
Asia
Chinese
and the
would go
conflict
to
in the East.
true, but I don't think the Chinese would go to world war over Iran. The scenario linking Iran and the PRC has been elegantly written in a novel, but I don't think it is a 2034. But I don't believe it is a serious prospect that China at this stage of history would risk global confrontation in order to rescue the Iranian regime. At best, they can give them some of the tools. They will not do the work for them.
Gerald Kimmett, taking all of that into context, we are drawing near to the end of the program, and yet I'd like to hear your perspective when we're talking about the American approach right now. Obviously, it continues to say we have all the tools on the table, as Secretary Hegseth has mentioned over the last 24 hours, and yet we still want to see a deal happen. That is what the president has set as the main aspiration. But if that fails, President Trump will undoubtedly pursue very strong military action. Are the tools, again, I keep going back to this question because that is the main question. Are the assets in the region enough in order to bring about regime change?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure in the target list that is residing right now in Central Command that one of the targets is regime change. Again, we never know what happens afterwards. I think there's still a fairly intact Iranian Revolutionary Guards Quds Force and the guards themselves. The Basij are still pretty much intact, and it could very well be that they are the intermediate temporary government at the end, if in fact there is regime change. So we may end up with something worse. However, I do agree with you. Both sides are prepared for negotiations. Both sides are prepared for war. I think they're both looking across the table at this point. But nonetheless, I'm surprised that, like the president, that we are not seeing the Iranians concede much. And we may find more starting at this next round of negotiations. I also find it very interesting that we're not really hearing anything out of the American negotiating team. Everything we're hearing about the negotiations is coming out of the Iranians. So this may be some clever misinformation that's coming out of the Iranians, but we'll see. But I
Well,
agree with you. I agree with you 100%. If negotiations fail, both countries will go to war. Candidly, I don't know who's going to fire the first shot. The Iranians could very well conduct a preemptive attack as a means of trying to score a few major hits before the Americans respond.
I will say something very carefully in that context. I think that the Iranian strong power at this stage, post the 12-day war in June, is overinflated. But with that being said, obviously, the United States and Israel and all other actors in the region need to prepare as well as possible for the worst case scenario. And at the same time, I also will highlight that regardless of what is currently being stated in the media and everywhere coming out of this mainstream media or elite media, as you would define them, Mr. Oren, the New York Times, and so on and so forth, anyone who worked at Washington, and I've been told this time and again, who had to deal with the Iranians, has really seen and admired the sophistication of Tehran's soft power and their ability to manipulate. General Kimmett, you wanted to say something about that?
No, it's just that my thumb was up. I agree with you completely, and they're not pretty bad. They're not bad at proxy power either, as Qasem Soleimani demonstrated.
Well, they're
They're
that
certainly
may
trying
have
to
been
throw
true
some
during the Qasem
sweetness.
Soleimani period, but after he was eliminated, obviously everything came crumbling during the
Right.
past 2 years when they miscalculated when it came to Israel and showed how weak they are in the face of true resolve. Now, Dr. Lerman, a closing statement from you. You have roughly 45 seconds.
But clearly, I would say one thing. The Iranian regime is running scared. The way they're maneuvering in the negotiating around the negotiating table, the tips they're throwing about, sweeteners for American business interests. This is running counter to everything that was dear and holy to Khamenei for years. These are indications of their fear. And so are the bravado statements about sinking aircraft carriers and destroying half of Israel or whatever, all indications that they are extremely anxious to try and avoid American military action, which at the end of the day, to me, signals that the Trump administration has already achieved a very large part of what it came to achieve. It has the regime knocked back off its feet, and with the right kind of actions, it could achieve much more.
General Kimmett, half a sentence.
America's in no mood for a regime change. We've done it too many times over the last 20 years, and it's never worked out well.
Mr. Oren?
President Trump looks to November, to the midterm elections, and he's fearful of regime change in Washington.
Well, everybody knows how you enter a war. Nobody knows how you exit one, and that is something that we need to take into calculation. The political aspects are obviously part of the calculation, but nonetheless, I'd like to thank Dr. Lerman, General Kimmett, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights today. I'd like to thank you at home as well. Until our next edition. From here in Jerusalem, Shalom. For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at tv7israelnews.com. Israel has launched operations
on Vladimir Putin.
helping Iran develop. We have logic, we have rationale, we understand how the system operates.